and I will let you know when Facebook tells me that we are formally live.
Sounds good.
And I believe we are now live. I will give it one more second. Yes, we're live. Okay. So one, thank you to everybody who is watching this evening. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and I chair the Issues Committee for Progressive Massachusetts. And this has been a fun, basically, set of live streams talking about the strange new world we live in, and both like the short-term and the long-term responses we need, and how it just speaks to how many things were already messed up and needing change. Today, I wanted to talk about how the State House is even operating now in a time of social distancing, as well as the general mess that is the Massachusetts State House, as well as the flip side, how it should actually be operating both now and long term. And so I'm delighted to have on with me State Senator Becca Rausch and State Representative Maria Robinson. Can you just quickly introduce yourselves to people watching?
Sure. Hi, folks. I am State Senator Becca Rausch. I represent the Norfolk, Bristol, and Middlesex District. I'm proud to have earned the endorsement of Progressive Mass last time around, running for re-election in November. Super excited to be here.
And I am State Representative Maria Robinson, also elected in 2018 in a weird write-in election. And I represent 2/3-ish of Framingham, and I'm annoyingly progressive in every way, shape, and form. So,
which is why we love you. One thing, as we're talking about the State House and how it operates, one thing that came to mind to me was the transparency pledge that both of you had signed on. I believe, Becca, you started it back in 2018 when you were running.
Boy, that feels like forever ago. But yes, I did.
Just want to remind people about what that was.
Yeah.
Kind of how that kind of helped set a tone.
Sure. So a whole bunch of us who were running as challengers in 2018, well, I had an idea, and a bunch of us had sort of been talking and kind of commiserating, strategizing together, if you will, about how to run, especially as women, and women running in a particularly challenging set of circumstances, given, the national climate. And I said, well, it's
today.
Yeah, fair point. Anyway, transparency is something that I had worked on a lot as an employee in the executive branch, and something that I personally care about very much, and something that my constituents, people all throughout my district, care about. And I said, we can just make a pledge to do this. Right? We believe in standing up for roll calls, and I believe in standing up for transparency and for being accountable to the people we represent. So I wrote a pledge, and I sort of shared it with all the other people in this group, all women. Most of us, I think, if not all of us, were alumni of Emerge Massachusetts, or going through the program at
Emerge,
or just graduated. Yeah, shout out to Emerge. And so we all signed, and we all launched it on the same day during the campaign, which was great. And we got actually a bunch of other people actually later wanted to sign on to it, which was very exciting. And so we all signed it. And lo and behold, some of us actually got elected, which was awesome, including the two of us. And here we are, actually, walking the walk and talking the talk. And I'm really proud to have been a champion on transparency in the Senate. We've had many votes on the record, including several that I'm confident would not have been on the record, but for myself and other people kind of saying, hey, let's take the vote on the roll. So we did, which is great. And I'll say that the coolest part for me, or one of the coolest parts, is that at the beginning of the session, the Senate all sits in this big circle, two halves of a circle, really. And there's one arc over here, kind of, that's where all the Republicans sit together. And it's called the Minority Crescent. And often, that's what it's called, sometimes called the Minority Arc, but I like the Minority Crescent. And it's this crescent to the circle. And at the beginning of the session, a lot of times, the people who were standing for roll call votes were everyone in the Minority Crescent and me. And that was cool. And all of my colleagues knew that I was going to always stand for roll calls. I didn't care what the question was or who was calling for the roll call. I was always going to stand up. And so I did. It was the minority crescent and me. And that's, great. We'd all sort of wave at each other, which was nice. And, but lo and behold, here we are, over a year in. And I mean, we're not in the chamber right now, which we're obviously going to talk about later, but in a few moments. But before the pandemic of COVID-19 hit, it was so amazing. People all around me also started standing up, and sometimes people across the circle standing up. And literally, all I did was just stand up, and it worked. It worked, and it's really exciting. That is really exciting.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, I was there with Becca making really bad Canva graphics to try and roll out our pledge back in the day because we didn't have time to make good ones. And so it's really nice to see it playing out in person. Obviously, it takes a lot more people in order to have a roll call in the House than it does in the Senate, but we're really fortunate that
how many does it require in both?
So out of the 160 of us, it requires 16 people to stand up for a roll call. And we have gotten down to the wire where I've literally jogged across the chamber in order to stand in my seat to make sure that I was counted for some of those over the course of time. I'm in the 4th division, so we get counted last. Usually what happens is all the Republicans are in the 2nd division. If they stand up, they yell out a number that is not even remotely close to the number of people that are standing up, but is over 16. And it's just like this weird running joke about people just pick a number, and rarely is there a formal count, but they tend to be very supportive of roll call votes. So it's this funny thing. I always talk about how politics is ultimately a circle where there's like one middle and then there's another side where the extremes meet, and like this is where the mass fiscal progressive mass universe like tends to hit, where they just like, we just need more roll calls. But for me, I came from a background of working in lots of other state legislatures and lots of other state governments. And it's a lot easier, frankly, to find out how people voted. I mean, I'm still sort of blown away by the fact that we don't have a consistent place to find votes from committees. I know certain committees release them, some committees don't. And I just sort of expected those things to be things that would be happening, and didn't realize that we would have to be spending a lot of time fighting for them all the time.
Yeah, that's something that, so in the Senate, you need 10% of the members or the number of the minority party. That's how it's written into the Senate rules. So it's a different count in the Senate. But to the point about committees, right? All the members of the Democratic Party in the Senate are, we have a shared leadership model, so each of us is assigned a committee to chair, or some other role in leadership. And so I'm the chair of a committee. I'm the chair of the Municipalities Committee on the Senate side. And one of the things that I made sure to do in the rules conversation with my House co-chair, who's great, is Rep. Jim O'Day from the Central Mass area, Worcester area. We agreed to put into the rules, in our committee rules, that you can request the records of the votes by email. So rather than having to show up in the building during business hours on a weekday to request a hard copy of the roll call of the votes in the committee, you can just send an email. And that's worked out, that's worked out great. And, here we are in this era of a pandemic, and maybe this is a good lead in, but, we are now having digital virtual hearings, right? Huge shout out to Sonia Chang Diaz and Kay Khan, who held the first ever virtual legislative hearing in the history of the Commonwealth. And I happen to sit on that committee. I'm a member of the Joint Committee on Children, Families, and Persons with Disabilities. We did get Zoom bombed like 5 minutes in, but the staff, took care of that person. And
staff are amazing. Like, they should be hugely complimented, because moderating those kinds of things are really have to focus.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And we did it, and it was great. And it was even the day of that like huge wind and rainstorm. So power went out and like things happened, but the hearing happened and it was great. And a couple days later, the Joint Committee on Elder Affairs, I'm the vice chair, State Senator Pat Jalen and State Rep Ruth Balzer are the co-chairs of that committee. They held a virtual hearing as well. And I'm certainly looking forward to what I hope will be a virtual hearing of the Elections Committee as we talk about by mail in a couple of weeks. So, I think we're showing.
Yeah, Becca, you made it 13 minutes without mentioning vote by mail.
I was holding out as long as I could, but like right there. It's just right there. But you know, we're at that point where, you know, this situation is not going away anytime soon, and we must be able to function.
Wait, Becca, when was the last time? Sorry, Senator. I should be better. Senator Rausch.
Doesn't matter.
We're all friends. You were in the State House.
What?
When was the last time you were in the State House?
It's been a few weeks since I was in the State House. There was a period where I was in there sort of 3 days, like 2 days 1 week and 1 day the next week, because as the municipality's chair, we had a big bill that was moving, and so I needed to be in the State House to kind of shepherd that bill, which did pass. That was the Muni 1 bill, and had a lot of really good stuff in there to make sure our towns and cities can continue to function, including some deficit spending, for example, that can be amortized over the next 3 fiscal years, because we all know revenue is really tanking, but also made sure to have a provision in there to prohibit shutoffs if people can't pay their bills. Right, and that was super important to me, to make sure that provision was in that bill. And you know, and the Senate was ready to go on that. So so I was really excited for that process and to be in the building. It's weird to be in the building with nobody there.
I haven't been back since March 12th.
Oh, wow.
A while.
Quick
I'm
joke.
going this week also to turn in my my signatures to get on the ballot.
Yeah.
Quick joke. Not having been there for over a month and a half is still more frequently than some people probably actually are ever in their offices.
No comment.
Not on the Senate side. The senators are there pretty often.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like people are there more often than we sometimes probably give them credit for, but
yeah, I see people pretty frequently. I mean, not right now, obviously. But
so the ridiculous part, though, is I have face masks in the State House because I brought them to be obnoxious, to say the least, during the immunizations related hearing. But then I forgot to bring them home with me. So the next time I go in, I'll be all set because I have them there already.
Nice.
Which becomes more important. Like those kinds of bills are incredibly important right now. The one that we're leading on that end. But
yeah, the Community Immunity Act, for those who are inquiring or wondering about the bill that Maria is talking about, the Community Immunity Act is actually still live in the Public Health Committee. It was just extended to May 30th. If you go to beccarauschma.com/community immunity, you can find all the information about that bill.
So as you were both noting, by having not been in the building for a little while, like how is the building functioning right now? Like what does it look like since we've seen some bills pass? Still, obviously, fairly slow moving. It was already slow moving to begin with, but that's beside the point. Like how is the building operating?
I don't know. There's some ways in which it is operating exactly the same as it always has, right? Like there isn't some sort of emergency shortened period for co-sponsorship. You know, we still have the full week, 2 weeks, something like that, a long period of time for co-sponsorship. Then you have to wait for your bill to get assigned to a committee. It's still considered a late file, right? It's still going through all of those same processes, going through the rules committee the way that it normally would, which, you know, it's great that there's normalcy, but then there's also the question of, should we be doing that differently because COVID requires things to be done differently or more quickly than that. So that's like one area that things haven't changed. We're doing a lot via informal session, and I think we're doing more controversial stuff via informal session than we normally would, right? Because we're not meeting formally. Do you want me to explain the difference?
What does informal session mean?
So formal session is, I mean, sorry, you can watch our videos on YouTube at Low Budget Beacon Hill.
If I put something in the chat, can like Facebook Live see that?
No, but if you send it in the chat, I can post it on the thread on Facebook Live.
You do that and I'll talk. So we just posted a video talking a little bit about this, but formal session is what you imagine, everybody in suits standing around, chit-chatting, standing at our machines, voting, debating, all that normal stuff. Informal session is usually when we keep things moving. We are constitutionally required to meet every 72 hours. So that meets that. Usually it keeps things like sick banks moving or...
what is a sick bank?
sick bank is when you're transferring sick leave time from one Commonwealth employee to another Commonwealth employee, which is like a very nice thing, but it's sort of insane that it requires that much effort. Or for some local bills that need to keep moving but are maybe not of importance to the entire membership. So a lot of things happen, and that's what happens when we are quote unquote out of session. So in a normal year that ends in an even number, we'd be out of session at the end of July. And then from August until December, we would still run informal sessions probably 2 times a week. The way that we are doing usually Mondays and Thursdays for us. You guys are...
We're also Mondays and Thursdays. And we're constitutionally obligated to be in session every 72 hours. So it's actually not weird for informals to be happening, right? Informals happen all the time, all through the session, because we are required by the Constitution to meet. The difference is that, and sick leave banks and all sorts of other things do go through in informal sessions frequently, often.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is that we have these formal sessions where that's what you, right? That's, first of all, watch the low budget Beacon Hill video that Jonathan's posting the link for. And, you know, the formal sessions are what people think of a big session with all the people in the chamber. We obviously can't do that right now. And that's usually where debates and votes happen, right? It's the only way that you get to a recorded vote, is by being in a formal session, or at least a recorded vote for everybody. I think the Senate recently did a standing vote. It wasn't an actual roll call, it was a standing vote on the signatures bill about reducing the signature count. And there was a standing vote, but I don't think it was a roll call. I'm pretty sure.
So with informal sessions, one thing that I know that bills need is something called unanimous consent, right? What does that mean in practice?
So that means that, sorry, do you want to take it?
No, go for it.
Okay. So in an informal session, anybody can basically put a bill aside, and anyone can actually stop the session entirely. So it's actually possible for any one person to make a motion to, it's called lay the matter on the table.
That's a Senate specific thing, to be clear.
Okay. So cool. So that's a good, important distinction. But in the Senate, we don't actually this is my kid's dinosaur book. It's not like you actually lay it on a table, but there is a motion to lay a matter on the table, and that actually stops the debate on a particular bill. The whole thing is stopped until the next session with a calendar. But in an informal session, not only can you stop a particular issue or a particular bill from going forward, you can actually stop the whole thing by calling a quorum, right? And a quorum, is generally speaking, almost always more people, more members that are actually in the chamber during an informal session. And that has happened in both the Senate and the House during the last, however long we've been in this, 6 weeks. But more recently, right, toward the tail end of it, where we are now. And members of the minority party in each chamber have stopped the session.
That means controversial stuff tends not to go through informal session because someone can stop it really quickly, and then you're trying to get through some other business that needs to be dealt with, and it really can hold things up for a long time.
Right. So that means without every unanimous consent, right, without everybody coming together and being behind a certain thing, any one person, regardless of party, anybody can come in, any member of the House, any member of the Senate, and put a kibosh on it.
And that kind of speaks to how, without having some type of alternative system in place, some of the, let's say, policies that I know we all support, advocating for, something like the Safe Communities Act, something like the Roe Act, are things that could not pass under in an informal session, because there will be at least one Republican, or even possibly some Democrats, who wouldn't support that happening, and you would need an actual vote to take place.
Correct. That's correct.
Bills like that.
Right. And when it's on unanimous consent, right, these are all real nuances of trying to explain to people. Becca and I are trying to help people better understand what happens underneath the dome, but it's still complicated. And so, for example, we had the MCAS vote in the House that was not great and not something I supported, but it sort of flew by really quickly and got enacted, and people are like, why did you vote for this thing? And then it's really hard to say to folks, well, actually, I haven't been in the building since March 12th, and we didn't really vote on it because we're doing it under unanimous, right? And that's a tough conversation to be having with constituents. And so it makes it a lot harder to defend actions versus saying, like, you know, I was here, this is why we made this decision. I think it's for the best because of X, Y, and Z. And so that's why it's also important to be having these formal sessions in order to continue to move policy, but then also be able to have the real discussion as to why it makes sense to vote for or against, and you're on the record. So any individual person can say, you know what, I don't support this. It's still going to pass anyway, but I want to be on the record as having voted no on it. And I think that's really important.
And I think that gets to an important contrast, that unanimous consent does not mean it was a unanimous vote of the body. Unanimous consent means nobody who was physically present in the room objected.
Correct.
Right.
And so that means that you might not have everybody in the room. You might not even have like advance notice to get in the room if you may have objected in something. It just simply means nobody who is present in the room is objecting.
Yeah, I'm sure if you're coming from North Adams and you have a half an hour notice before something hits the floor, you can't exactly like get in your car and get there in time. So it definitely makes it sometimes a little bit more difficult when there isn't significant amounts of notice as to what's going to happen in the session.
And out of curiosity, has the amount of notice that has been given for bills, has that decreased from what's typical? Like the notice is often short to begin with for how much people get before bills. Has that been shorter during this period, or is it like about the same?
I think it's about the same, if not more, actually, at least for me.
Yeah.
For my,
yeah, I think your side of the building might be a little different. Ours is sort of never all that consistent anyway to begin with in terms of notice. So I found out recently that the Senate gets like an email before informal and formal sessions saying what they're going to do or like what they plan to do. And that sounds like a dream, man. Very exciting stuff going on.
We get an agenda. It tells us what we're going to do that day or what's going to happen. Usually for informal sessions, we get it that day. For formal sessions, we know in advance what's coming.
Yeah, I just read State House News and hope for the best. So, but it's, yeah. And so we are the House, to be clear, the House is going to be debating new rules this week as we attempt to work our way into having a formal session on Thursday. And so it's really interesting, the proposal that's on the table. It involves like some people being in the chamber, but most people just being home watching on the internet and then like call in. It's very like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, where you call in to say like, I want to talk. And then if you're going to vote against the thing that we're voting on, you call in and let people know as well. So it's not exactly the 21st century kind of solution that I envision in my head of what we're capable of doing, but I get that it's still something, and exciting that we will have some form of formal session is good news for sure.
So before we talk about what the House's rules are, I'm just here. If both of you had the ability to design how the chambers could operate now, and you could wave your magic wand and create a set of rules for remote operation, what are some of the things that you would want in it?
Ooh, I don't know. I mean, no one ever gives me a magic wand, so that's something. I mean, I will say that the Senate Democrats have been meeting for caucuses over Zoom, and it works. For the most part, it really works. There's always like somebody who forgets to turn off mute, which someone who somebody always has some kind of technical problem. But for the most part, it has been working, and we've had really good conversations. I don't know. I'm still thinking about my magic wand question.
It's really complicated. I definitely think having some sort of video conferencing versus doing a combo of like phone and watching online is tough, especially knowing, we all know the live stream isn't always perfect and sometimes it cuts out, and that's concerning, right? It's not the same as walking up or down the stairs a couple of flights to say like, oh, you know, my live stream cut out in my office, so I had to come up here to see what's going on. If you're cut out and the technology doesn't work for some reason, or it's raining in Western Mass or something like that, then there's not a whole lot of other options available. So it becomes a difficult question. But what's nice to see is that people are adjusting to technology in a way. Like we've had this text app that we use for the Progressive Caucus that we have theoretically used all session, but was really sparing for most of the time. Hey, buddy. How's it going? But now people are really picking up on that. The Progressive Caucus is also meeting by Zoom basically every day. And so gives us all a chance to have those kinds of conversations that we would otherwise have in the hallway or be able to do some other fashion. And I think it's hard because there's 160 of us, you know, maybe we don't have all 160 people's phone numbers, so you can't necessarily contact them. You know, I think it's a lot easier when you're only looking at 39 other people in your phone to try and get in contact with them and have a conversation about how to move things in general, because so much happens on the floor of, hey, you know, every Wednesday I have my Post-it note that says, here are like the 6 people I need to talk to on the floor about the things, and it's a really good chance to move things along, and that's a lot harder to do.
One thing, out of curiosity, would they be able to operate something, let's say if they were to use a form of technology like Zoom, and have it set up, like, because I know the house has divisions, right? Because you have a lot of people to manage. Could you like set up breakout rooms for each division so that you're all technically like for managing a thing where like if each division is in its own like live stream breakout room for like the easier managing of everything?
40 people is like a pretty manageable number on Zoom.
Yeah.
I think that's like about as high as it goes before you start to go like, oh my God, this is too many people, and how do I find the one person that's not on mute? But I think that's part of it. And, you know, making sure that we're getting, you know, I would love to see something where we do have a caucus, even if it is just with the 40 people in your division, to find out what's going on a weekly basis. We don't have that same sort of caucus system set up at this moment in time. We've got one coming up tomorrow on a conference call, but I do think conference calls are a little bit harder to sort of get in there in the conversation versus, you know, it's hard to ignore the person going, calling me, I have something to say, and being able to gauge people's facial and body reactions is important when you're talking about some of this more sensitive stuff. And some of the stuff that we're proposing policy-wise is like well out of the comfort zone of a lot of people right now, because all of the cracks of our system are just showing and widening every moment of every day. And, you know, it's an interesting time to be a progressive, because these are all things we've been fighting for a long time. And so there's some opportunity in there, but at the same time, there's such massive loss because it takes something this catastrophic for people to actually take things more seriously. And that shouldn't have to be the way that it happens, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we can all readily see that the inequities of our systems, all of our systems, are just ever so much more apparent now. And you know, there is this kind of weird silver lining that at least more people are aware of those inequities and the systemic nature of those inequities now. But I did want to come back to Maria's point about body language and being in the chamber together. You know, as I'm thinking about my like magic wand opportunity, I mean, video conferencing is sort of like where I first go to, but it's true that you can't substitute over video what happens when we are all together in the chamber. And what happens in the chamber is actually really important. And being able to see people across the room. And frankly, you can't even get it on the live stream, because the live stream, generally speaking, is focused on the rostrum, right? The rostrum is that big spot where the speaker of the House, where the Senate president is, and the clerk, and, you know, the people who are sort of running the show, but you don't see the whole chamber. But you can when you're in the chamber. And you know, and there's really no substitute for that. So it's hard to figure out what the right solution is. You know, and we're not the only state that's trying to figure out what the right solution is.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, Virginia had a session, you know, the equivalent of their House of Representatives had a session like in a giant parking lot or in the grass outside of the State House or something like that in Virginia. I mean, everybody just outside.
Yeah, I mean, we've batted around the idea, like, what if you put a third of the people in Gardner, a third of them in the actual chamber, some in the balcony up there, and then some other people in like other large open spaces? Would that ultimately be more effective? I mean, they're
Use the public garden and the common.
use the common. You know, the system that is being proposed here is like, I'm going to call you and then you're going to tell them that this is how I wanted to vote. And it to me gets a little too close to comfort to our rule of like, you can't vote for other people, which I think is one of the most important things to make sure that we're still doing. And I just want to make sure that we're preserving the integrity of what we're doing at any point in time.
And so to your point then, as you're noting that the House just released a set of rules that they want to vote on later this week for how the body should operate. Initial reactions. How is this thing structured? Does it do anything good? Does it do anything bad?
So I have lots of conflicting feelings about us meeting either in person or virtually. And I actually think the fact that we're splitting the baby is almost worse than having everybody come in and sit in your own office, socially distance from each other, or everybody remote. Now I feel like I know that it's set up to be such that you're still counted as being there if you're there remotely, but I know that there are going to be challengers that use that against certain people, and like, you should either be everybody doing the same thing or everybody staying home. And I really struggle with that, as now, like, that's a moral choice that we're making. Are we going to infect a gas station operator that we come in contact with, or, you know, by making the choice of going in, or are we putting our families at risk or putting ourselves at risk, people having to disclose their own medical conditions in any way, shape, or form? And it gets into this really tough decision making for all of us. So it's nice that there is an option, but it's not like there's a strong preference, I guess, put in place one way or the other. In talking about roll calls, I think the thing that jumps out at me immediately is, you know, we are proposing to change the number of reps required for a roll call from
You don't need to say we, because it's not your project.
Still in my chamber. And so it's going from 16 to 40, which seems like a real big jump, and there's not like a whole good reason as to why that's changing. So that's something that I know that I'm going to be asking a lot of questions about in the days to come as we look at that. So, you know,
how would a roll call work how the House is proposing?
That's such a good question. I'm assuming that it is something where you call in and let people know that is, you are in favor of voting, but the sense of the House for yeas and nays, it just says that it's being up to 25%. I assume that you call your division leader or the floor monitor or the person you're also, in my mind, when I think about this, if anyone's been inside the State House and been to the members area, I'm imagining that we're actually using those telephones that have not been used for the past like 15 years in their like individual little telephone booths that are so adorable. I hope that there's an opportunity to use that.
They're really adorable. I hadn't thought about that, but that's so good.
So I think that there's, you know, that's something that worries me a little bit of, you know, are we changing the actual democratic participation for the purposes of making things easier? And I don't know if that's the direction that we should be going in. And I recognize that we want to get things done. I've been a very loud voice of saying, like, we need to find a way to have formal session, but I think preserving existing rules and norms are going to be important under a new version, because I don't know how long this is going to last. This could be
none of us know.
That we use it for the month of May. This could be a thing that we use it until the rest of 2020 or possibly even start into next year, which I don't even know how we would legally figure that out. So we've got a lot going on, and certainly we don't want to risk the health of anybody or their families. I make sure to text my staff immediately and say, like, you're not coming in. You're absolutely not coming in. You can do your job from home. And I'm hoping that lots of other people are doing the same.
Yeah, I have, except to the extent that one member of my staff can ride a bike to get to the State House and not have to take public transportation, only for purposes of checking the mail and apparently to try to salvage our plants, which they are not doing. Our office plants are just not doing very well right now. That is the least of anybody's concern, of course. But it was that's like a thing. I'm
more concerned that I left my beanbag chair in there, and I really wish I had it at home, to be honest.
You'll have to pick it up when you next head into the building.
Yeah, this week.
But yeah, any other thoughts on like any creative things that you're seeing other states do for how that they can operate? They can manage the goals of you. There are actually a lot of things that you should do on somewhat of a quick timeline, but needing to have robust, democratic, and transparent processes, and like also just needing to be doing stuff.
Yeah. So I think first of all, I encourage people to read. Was it the Washington Post that had that, or was it the New York Times? It was the Post, I think, that had that really interesting article about the House of Representatives and Congress, and sort of the ways in which members really felt like they weren't getting the same level of access that they typically do, and weren't able to do their jobs the way they typically do. And of course, our jobs have zero job description and change regularly as it is. But I would say we've really shifted so much towards constituent services that there isn't as much time in the day to be able to focus on the legislating side. And it is supposed to be a balance between the two. I know that I find the way that all states do things really interesting, and we should pick and choose from what they do. There are certain states that have a constituent services department where all constituent services stuff go to this one office full of staff, and they handle the services for the entire state. They would probably be losing their minds right now dealing with unemployment. But on a regular basis, it's an interesting model. So then the legislators have an aid to like just focus just on the purposes of writing legislation, passing legislation, which I think is always an interesting way of doing things. But in Congress, they've got 453 members, or 35 members, sorry, in the House, and they're doing these big conference calls. There was that like really nice human interest story about the woman who ran all the conference calls and said, you're up next and you're up next. And if they figured out how to do that, there's got to be a way for us to figure out how to do that as well, in order to make sure. And I think the Senate does a really cool phone tree situation that sounds great. So you're at least checking in with someone from, the higher ups.
Yeah. This is interesting because we've just hit a moment where there are actually some differences between the House and the Senate. Right? The Senate members have a bigger staff. So I mean, absolutely, we are. I think all of us are bombarded with constituents, small businesses, people looking, to access their unemployment. People can't get a COVID-19 test but should, first responders who need, housing or testing, there's just so many issues happening right now that there's definitely an increased focus for everybody across the board on constituent services. And on the Senate side, we have a bigger staff for the most part. So I have a team of people, and we are all kind of, I do all the things, but I have, I also have a legislative director, and so I am able to focus on policy and focus on my role and responsibility as the municipalities chair, and also serve constituents and also participate in caucus, and we do have this phone tree buddy, we call it the buddy system, that the Senate president established, and she sort of asked a number of people, and I actually don't know how many people are the sort of lead buddies, but we each have each of us as rank and file members have a partner who is maybe a member of leadership, maybe someone who is otherwise sort of asked by the Senate president to do this, and we check in on a routine basis. I just checked in with my person. I got a text message from my person like a couple of hours ago, and he was like, "Hey, I got something that I want to talk to you about," and so we talked about it, and that's actually been great. That's been really great, and frankly, having caucus also has been really great because we all spend a lot of time together, and it's nice whether we agree, disagree. We have 17 new problems that came up in the last 17 minutes, which is actually a thing. It's nice to just be able to talk together. And the Senate has this very robust, working group specifically designated to and designed for this moment. So Joe Comerford, as the chair of the Public Health Committee, was tasked by the Senate President, appointed by the Senate President to run the COVID-19 working group, steering working group. And then there are a bunch of subcommittees underneath it. So I'm on the subcommittee on municipalities and first responders and elections, right? There's a group of us that are working together. And then I'm also on the subcommittee that's specifically designated toward first responders and taking care of our public safety people. And, there are a bunch of little subcommittees. There's a subcommittee specifically on a safety net, right? And so there are sort of, nobody can do all of the work here, right? It would be superhuman for anybody with even, a phenomenal number of staff people to be able to take on all of the ramifications and the fallout of COVID. It's working, right? I mean, we have, each of us has sort of a lane, for lack of a better phrase, a focus area, let's say, and we're able to focus and drill down and work through the issues and really tease it out and try to come up with solutions. I think we're trying to be part of the solution, right? We have lots of solutions to find because there are lots of problems.
Yeah, and I would say the Progressive Caucus is trying to emulate something relatively similar to that structure where we've got subgroups working on specific areas, but it still just generally requires us to be a little jack of all trades all the time with the kinds of things that we get, and especially because people, for one reason or another, often feel more comfortable reaching out to reps than their senators, maybe because we just have a smaller surface area to cover. And so, I think my understanding is a lot of the unemployment stuff is coming to reps more. And so we're just having this long running relationship with the delightful people over at the Department of Unemployment Assistance who all deserve a raise after this.
Raises.
We are genuinely working, and we'll get emails from them at 3 a.m, 5 a.m. I don't know if they sleep at all, but trying to compensate for lack of investment over time by the administration, honestly, if we're being frank about it, in some of these customer service type roles. And they're building out quickly, never as quickly as anyone wants, but still running into a lot of problems there. So if you watching this are having issues with unemployment, you should 100% reach out to your state rep or senator, or just reach out to me and I'll redirect you, because I've been doing a lot of that recently.
I think we all have. There's like a sort of interesting new camaraderie about just directing people to the appropriate member of whatever body you're in. Just, you need to see this person, and you just sort of help each other out.
Exactly.
So two things. So one was curious to think of. We were talking about how the legislature is operating right now. I'd be curious your thoughts on any changes that let's say 2021. We're blessed in that this is mostly passed, and the legislature can operate like all in person. What are some things you would like to see done differently in how the legislature operates? And then after we discuss that, I'll give both of you a few minutes to talk about some of the bills that you filed in response to the situation now.
Sure. So, I mean, there's some like real basic stuff. I love a good joke about State House IT more than anything else in the universe. And so, like, they've expanded our email inboxes, and it's mind-blowingly awesome that, like, we'd love to see that continue on, and us to continue to push for technological upgrades in order to ensure that we can actually do our jobs from wherever, because we really, in many ways aren't in the State House that much. We're often in the district doing a lot of the work there and need to be able to access all those same tools and information from afar. This has just really exacerbated that problem for everybody, and not just people who live outside the 95 corridor, right? And so those are things, I've been pushing for a little while of, it would be great if we had some sort of service where if people who didn't speak English called, we could direct them to the service to help figure out what's going on, instead of relying on the 5 aides who speak Spanish and the 1 aide who speaks Vietnamese, right? Who ultimately get bombarded with those kinds of requests, and that's not really part of their job description. Those are all things that are also coming to light as we move forward, that we need to be better, more nimble, take advantage of 21st century technologies to be able to do our job more efficiently and effectively. Becca? Sorry, Senator.
Yeah, I'll definitely add in a vote for better tech. It was when I was working for the executive branch before I got elected, the executive shifted over to Office 365, and because of the particular job and my particular areas of expertise, I was one of basically the guinea pigs to get shifted over first. It was like, it was so exciting to have that, capacity, just modern technology. And that we're only just getting there now. And that has been, the last time I was in the building, we were talking earlier about the last time I was in the building, I spent hours of time archiving emails so that I could clear out space in my, not because I'm not processing the emails, but because I file them away, and keep them, so that if I need them later, they're actually filed and accessible. But eventually you get a lot of volume.
Yeah, we get a daily update from the administration, which is really great, but it's several megabytes.
It is not a reduced size PDF. It is a very large PDF. So I took all of those out of my inbox. I downloaded them so that I wouldn't lose them. But you have to just clean it out, because otherwise your constituents' emails bounce back. And it's extra interesting. There's sort of an extra added challenge when you're a committee chair and you're accepting testimony, because that testimony all gets emailed in. So on Muni 1, we received 150 or so emailed pieces of testimony, and that, many of those had attachments, and it just basically landed me in email jail, because it just blew up my inbox, which was a good, I want everybody to be able to participate, and that's fantastic. But I think with that technology does come an added ability to pretty easily enhance our transparency, right? We know that we have access issues, right? For example, on the hearing on the Community Immunity Act, which is a bill to basically create and implement comprehensive infrastructure in the public health sphere with regard to infectious disease prevention. And for that hearing, there were a lot of people who actually couldn't come because they were immunocompromised and couldn't physically be in the space. And we have a committee rule. I think all committees have this rule that you can't read someone else's testimony, right? You have to show up to read your own testimony. So now that we know that we have the technological capacity to actually hold an entirely virtual hearing, I'm kind of hopeful that we can make some modifications to accessibility specifically for the hearing process, to account for accessibility issues, right, for whatever a disability might be. And that would be really great. That'd be really great.
And I want to give both of you time, since I know that Becca, you filed a bill on vote by mail, and Maria, I know that you have a bill on hazard pay. And so I wanted to make sure that if you had either you wanted to talk a little bit about those bills, that you would be able to do so.
Go ahead.
I'll go first. It'll be shorter. So Representative Taki Chan put in a bill for hazard pay for Commonwealth employees, and in hearing from my constituents, many of whom are working at grocery stores right now, and often without proper PPE, well, almost always without proper PPE, but barely with face coverings in some locations, it felt really important to make sure that we were appropriately compensating people who actually had to be out there. And frankly, to some degree, also disincentivize people who were continuing to keep their businesses open when they absolutely did not have to be open. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of discussion about what is and is not an essential business. And I know that the number of essential businesses continues to expand. And it's definitely concerning from a public health perspective that we're kind of doing that on an ad hoc basis. Mm-hmm. So I put in a bill, and it is definitely like putting a stake flag right in the ground there saying all private businesses have to pay time and a half for anybody who showed up in person since the emergency began, right? And I recognize how so wildly unrealistic that probably is for especially like the smallest business owners, whom I've heard plenty from, who are, are worried about being wiped out. But at the same time, these large grocery chains are making more money than they ever have before. Those people are working harder than they ever have before. And that includes medical personnel as well. Not, they deserve to at least be able to, pay for additional childcare because they still have to go to work, and they might already pay for daycare, but that doesn't mean anything in the era of COVID. And they could get essential services, but that's not always possible for some people, especially if their kids are immunocompromised. They don't want them to go to some of the emergency essential daycare. So it's, there are lots of people in a ton of different situations, and while we can't protect them the way that I think we would love to be able to protect everybody right now, they definitely deserve to be paid more. Someone wrote back, they're like, do you realize that this means someone who makes minimum wage would make $19.75 an hour? And I was like, yeah, that's the point. It's that they would. And they're like, you honestly think that they deserve to make that? And I was like, yes, I absolutely do think they deserve to make that. Especially now, but in general, I think that too. So I think it's going to be a good conversation piece for us, and it just moved to House Labor and Workforce Development today. So excited to get that on the hearing schedule. And Becca's is more about a longer term thing instead of an immediate term thing, but very, very important.
Well, all the terms, yeah. And I was ready and raring to go to co-sponsor that hazard pay bill. I will say I'm generally speaking not co-sponsoring bills right now because so many have been filed and there's so many other things that I need to do, and so I'm co-sponsoring very infrequently, but this was one of the ones that I made sure to co-sponsor. And there have been a few others, but anyway, vote by mail, right? I think we can all readily see, especially after Wisconsin, just how fragile, frankly, our democratic system of voting is right now. And free, fair, open, and safely accessible elections are an absolute cornerstone pillar of our democracy, and we cannot let a pandemic, we must not let COVID-19 strip away our right to vote. So I crafted a comprehensive universal vote by mail bill. It's called the 2020 Vote by Mail Act. Hopefully everybody has already heard about it. You can go to beccarausch.com/VBM vote by mail to log your advocacy and read more about the bill. This creates as universal, automatic a vote by mail system as we could possibly have in the Commonwealth. Every registered voter gets a mail-in ballot for the general election by mail automatically. Every single registered voter, everybody who's registered with a party also automatically would get a ballot for the primary election in September. Massachusetts offers sort of enhanced access, I guess is the way to talk about it, enhanced access to our primary ballots. In most other states in the nation, if you want to vote in a primary election, you have to be registered with that particular party. But in Massachusetts, we actually have much more open primary elections. So if you're an unenrolled voter, you can pick whichever primary you want to vote in. So we need to know which primary ballot you want, right? Democrat, Republican, any of the other parties that are available for a
But
primary.
they're married to people that just switch it up every single election. Makes them crazy.
Sometimes it keeps you guessing. So we also put into the bill, into the 2020 Vote by Mail Act, a requirement for a web portal for people, to unenrolled voters, to specifically request a particular party's primary ballot, and then those would be mailed out as well. We also included prepaid postage on the return envelopes, a comprehensive, basically an education and outreach plan so that everybody knows that this is happening and knows how to vote by mail, written instructions in the vote by mail packet that you get in multiple languages. I'm sure I'm forgetting things. Ballot tracking software for the primary. The ballots would be due back on the day of the primary, since our primary date is so incredibly late. We are actually, by statute, the absolute dead last in the country. I have plenty to say about that, but I'll say another time. There's a video on Facebook, on my Facebook page, that you can go and check out. It was a really fun speech, actually, on the floor. But since our primary is so late, we really do need the ballots back by election day in order to adequately prepare for and actually hold the general election. But for the general election, we set the deadline to be postmarked. Your ballot would need to be postmarked by the November election date and received 5 days thereafter. We know that these systems work, right? They work in various other places all across the country. So it's not really a question of if we can do this, it is a question of whether we are going to do this. It will certainly cost money, but we have tens of millions of dollars in funds from the federal government that are ready and raring to go for purposes of enhancing our central registry of voters technology, for example, or securing and procuring ballot tracking software. So there's a lot of money already available to us in order to implement this. We did also maintain in-person voting and also provide PPE for poll workers, absolutely essential, especially since many of our poll workers are seniors and are particularly susceptible to this particular virus. And we also added in a provision to make the November election day a holiday. So there's it's a packed bill, like a really packed bill. Are all of our kids coming in to visit? Yep. So really packed bill, the 2020 Vote by Mail Act. There's a lot, there are different perspectives on how to solve the problem of people being able to safely and accessibly cast their votes in September and November. But I think given what we're already seeing and what we are seeing unfold in our state already with regard to municipal elections, local town elections, and also with regard to what we have seen in Wisconsin, where an opt-in system just full on failed, 9,000 ballots were never sent. It seems pretty clear that opt-out, right, a universal automatic system is the way to go. So I'm happy to answer questions. I'm certainly getting lots of emails about it.
So we hit the hour mark, so I do want to wrap up, but I would say final comments from both of you. Think whether things in your mind, something that people watching now or watching later should do, or however you want to give closing remarks.
Yeah, I mean, we are still as accessible as ever. We might not be in the State House, but we're all sitting in front of our email absolutely 24/7. And so don't hesitate to reach out, and we will poke people if necessary to make sure that you're getting a response, because I think more than ever is a time when we need people to believe in government. It's one of those things I feel deeply about, that part of why Trump was elected and part of why we're in the situation we are in right now is because people just said, government's not really working right, let's just change it up, let's just do something real different. And so we need to prove to them in this time more than ever, where they're really depending on us, that we can get them the services that they need. And so, but that requires a two-way street where people reach out and we're reaching out to them as best as we possibly can. But know that we're absolutely still here and doing our jobs, even if we're not physically in the State House.
Yeah, hang in, everybody. This is 10 marathons all stacked on top of each other. It's a real long haul. We are here for you. It's a challenge. It's a challenge for everybody, and there's just a lot of pain and a lot of hurt right now. And frankly, I hear from people all the time about individual pain and hurt and struggle and hardship. And frankly, all the pain and struggles and hardships from before the pandemic didn't just magically go away. They're just now exacerbated, or, drowned out by a pandemic. I think, those of us who have been champions of transparency are working extra hard to ensure, as much transparency and accountability as we can possibly muster, and make happen. All of the constituent services, we are here. Email, call, the phones do still go to the State House, but we do check those. We can check that voicemail remotely. If you're looking for particular things to advocate on, like vote by mail, come on, you gave me a space to do it. You can do that. That advocacy is still valued and important. And I'll also say something that I know all three of us on this call, and probably everyone who's watching, feels very strongly about: elections matter in a very real, and this is not really about vote by mail, just in general, elections matter, and who we have sitting in the seats in the state legislatures, in the corner offices, certainly in the White House and in Congress, all of those elections matter. So please engage in a phone bank, figure out how to engage in any sort of, campaigning type activities. I know anybody's campaign plans all got thrown out the window when this all hit, because you can't knock a door and you can't stand outside and you can't do any of the things that we usually do on campaigns. But find your candidates, and I myself have a race in November. I have a right-wing Republican running against me in November, and we have to win re-election. And and as only the second Democrat ever to have held this seat, I have a real race, and that's also part of this reality. So again, elections matter. Please, just by virtue of being stuck in your house, it does not mean and you can't work hard for your candidates. In fact, in a lot of ways, we have to work extra hard.
Yeah. So one, I want to thank both of you so much for joining. I'll give you both a shout out, because although we haven't really promoted our updated scorecard website with votes from 2019, you both did have 100%, and are some of the few people who had 100% on scorecard.progressivemass.com. If people feel like browsing and seeing the data there, who knows how many additional votes we'll be able to add from the 2020 part of the session. We'll find out. And then last thing, before we go, if people are interested in following you, how can they follow you on Facebook, Twitter, etc., for the work that you're doing?
Yeah. So all of I have separate accounts for my official State House business and also my campaign stuff. So on the State House side, everything is Becca Rausch MA. So on Facebook, it's Becca Rausch MA. On Twitter, it's Becca Rausch MA. My website is BeccaRauschMA.com. On the campaign side, everything is Becca Rausch, no MA. So Facebook, Becca Rausch, website, BeccaRausch.com. On Twitter, actually, someone already had the handle Becca Rausch, so there's an underscore between the first name and the last name. But that's it. I would love to have you all come on over and follow. We got lots of exciting things. I will also say I have a portion of my State House official website that is specifically designated to COVID-19. So if you go to BeccaRauschMA.com/COVID-19, you'll get updates. You can sign up for the emails. You can, get all of the resources. If you think there's a resource that we don't have and you want us to add, send us your suggestions by all means. We're trying to push out as much useful and accurate information as we can.
Awesome. Thank you. And Maria?
Twitter, Maria Robinson, MA, easiest way to find me. And then there are links to everything else from there. So
much to me.
So again, State Senator Becca Rausch, State Rep Maria Robinson, thank you both for all that you do, and thank you for joining us this evening, and thank you to everybody who is listening now or will be listening later.
Thank you so much for having us. Be safe and healthy, everybody.
Mm-hmm.